And we are live with Pastor Isaac and his wife Kate. Thank you guys so much for doing this. The people are watching.
Thank you, Sean. Hello, everyone. My name is Pastor Isaac Dusenberry, one of your associate pastors, and I'm here tonight with my wife Kate in our home. And thank you for joining us on this third round of a Facebook Live discussion. We were actually just talking a few minutes ago and saying maybe a good thing to do would just say a few things about ourselves, about our personal lives, where we're from. Maybe not everyone knows. So I'll start. I'm from Conway, South Carolina originally, so Murrells Inlet is not very far at all from my home. So I feel blessed in many ways to be so close to where I grew up. I'm a graduate of Carolina Forest High School, class of 2007, and I went on to Coastal Carolina University where I majored in history. And my original trajectory was to be a high school teacher, but somewhere in that I felt a call to ministry and decided to apply to seminary, and the rest was history. I graduated from Duke Divinity School in 2018, went on to serve as a chaplain at Duke Hospital, and then in March of 2019 I received the call from my district superintendent that Blaine Memorial and Murrells Inlet would be my next endeavor, and it's been a wild ride ever since. Kate, why don't you share a few words about yourself?
Sure. So I'm Kate. I'm from way western Massachusetts, a beautiful little town called Great Barrington. I went to college in Florida Southern College. Both the Kates went there, fun fact. After that I moved to North Carolina and began working as a teacher, which is one of my greatest passions. I've worked in public school, private school, virtual school, before virtual school was a thing that anybody had heard of before. And happy to be here now in South Carolina, living by the beach.
Yeah, and Kate and I, we met in 2016, and it was one of those situations where she saw me and fell in love instantly and just had to marry me right then. So we've been married for 4 years, and that's hard to believe. And of course, as many of you know, we now have a 1-year-old named Charlie, who is a lot of joy. We actually just put him down for bed, so hopefully he cooperates. If he does wake up and cries or needs something, Kate will dismiss herself politely and the show will continue, but from what I can see now on the baby monitor, he is sound asleep. So let's hope that continues. Sean, I believe you already have some questions lined up for us, and we look forward to talking about that.
Yeah, that's right. We got a lot of good questions to our info at Blaine. And just so everyone knows, we're going to be doing this next week as well. So you can always send your questions to info@blaineumc.org. But this is a great one to start off with, and it's pretty general. We'll start with you, Isaac. How do you experience renewal in your life?
Yeah, that's very relevant to what we've been talking about these last few weeks. And I think my answer definitely begins with acts of service. I think I feel closest to God whenever I commit myself to acts of service to others. I think one of the fundamental principles of the Bible and our theology is that in giving we receive. In the giving of our love, in the giving of our kindness, in the giving of our generosity, in the giving of ourselves to others, we receive, that much more through God's abundant blessings in our lives. I think regardless of what we do, of what career we're in, I think we're all at risk for burnout at some point in our lives, maybe now more than ever. But God says if we remain steadfast, right, in our discipleship, then we will be given rest, right? God provides for God's people. God is there through every storm. So I think I experience new life when I share my life with others. So being renewed is key to my relationship with other people. And I think that's fundamentally biblical, and that has been vivified in my experience as well.
I think Isaac forgot one important way that he renews himself: video games. So
I do also play video games, perhaps more than I should. Thanks, dear.
Anytime.
Well, how do you experience renewal in your life?
One thing that's really important for me to do every day is to go outside. And I think I've passed that along to Charlie. Isaac actually jokes that I'm a sunflower, and I just bloom when I'm outside. So being outside is really important to me, and that's a way that I definitely experience renewal. I'm also a very relational person. My family, my friends, my students, when I'm teaching, which I'm not currently this year, but they're also important to me. And when I'm in that sense of community. So I'm definitely somebody who's always looking for ways to help my friends and ways to be a better friend, sending out postcards and cards to my friends to remind them that I love them and miss them. So those are the main ways that I renew myself, keeping those people close. You can find me on FaceTime with one of my friends or family members pretty often.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I fell in love with Kate, is that you're so selfless, and you're willing to do anything for the people that you love. And I think Kate, she enters relationships, and it's not about what they can do for her, but rather what she can do for them. And so you're always looking for ways to love people well and to show them that you love them. And I think that's a great thing about you, and why you're such a wonderful partner in ministry. So
that's really kind of still looking for friends in Rose Inlet, South Carolina.
Yeah.
So, yeah, send me a message.
Here's another good question. It's a good segue. Who in your life has exemplified that steadfast generosity? Generosity in any way.
Do you want to take this one?
Sure. So really easy for me to answer that question. My dad, one of the most generous people that I know, with his kindness, his love, his money, you name it. One of my favorite stories about my dad that demonstrates that is he was always the coach for, I played every sport growing up, and my siblings were really involved in sports or dance, you name it. My dad was always a part of that, and I am extremely competitive. I'm sure Isaac has a couple of stories that could go along with that, but we can leave those till next time. I'm extremely competitive, so my dad, being the generous, kind man that he is, would always volunteer to coach the teams. And my team was always the worst team. And I mean always the worst team, and I would be so upset about it. But it was always the worst team because my dad, instead of picking the best players when all of the coaches met to make sure the teams were even, my dad would pick the players who didn't exactly fit the mold, right? He would pick that girl that was dancing in the outfield and not paying attention to the fact that they were at some sort of t-ball or baseball tryout at all, right? He would pick the misfits, for lack of a better word, for my team. So my team never got to be the winning team. But looking back on that experience now as an adult, when I would walk through my small town with my dad, we would still see a lot of those people. And they always greeted my dad with a smile, his little secret handshake, or, high five that he had with them. And you could see that he truly made a difference in their lives and made them feel important in that moment when so many other people wouldn't. And then to sort of piggyback off of that, my father's not in good health. And we recently did a GoFundMe to raise money to bring him down to South Carolina, because I'm his main carer, the person who takes care of all his medical stuff and financial stuff and insurance and all of that. So to bring him closer to us down here, and it was incredible to see those people from that t-ball team, right? The kids from that basketball team. The kids who he would always say hi to in my classes growing up, who were the opposite of the cool kids. Those people were donating money to help my father, even though he likely hasn't been a part of their lives in 20 years, So that goes to show, what a generous man that he was in so many different ways.
Wow,
Yeah.
that was beautiful.
Well, she's so right. And one of the things I love about my father-in-law, he has a motto that his kids grew up with, and it's simple but poignant, and I think especially poignant now. He always said, "Do the right thing."
That's a Gordon classic, Gordon Ball classic.
And I think another reason why that story is so beautiful is that it's really so biblical. That's exactly what Jesus did. You know, when you look at the people that Jesus picked for his team, for his disciples, they were the misfits. They were the outsiders. They were less than. They were the people you would not expect someone like the Messiah to pal around with. And yet that's exactly the kind of people that Jesus sought out, the misfits. And he took those misfits and did amazing things with them and brought forward this incredible movement we now know as Christianity. So whether your dad knew it or not, he was tapping into that. And whenever we can see, you know, the potential in others and see the best in people, I think that's fundamentally what generosity is and what keeps us committed to that. And I think Kate and I are both very blessed to have such wonderful fathers. In fact, you know, the way I would answer this question, who in my life has exemplified generosity, would definitely be my dad. Some of you might remember a couple of weeks ago in my sermon, I told the story about how my dad made a very generous contribution to a lady who worked at a video store in our local town. And he just did it on a whim, out of nowhere. She had some really serious medical needs. She had a little collection jar on the counter, and he saw it and asked about it and responded accordingly. And when I was writing that sermon, it was actually hard to pick which of my father's generosity stories I was going to talk about, because there's so many. Another story that really sticks out about my dad, I remember years ago when I was probably about 5 years old, my dad took me to the circus that was in town. You know, one of those old school traveling circuses with the big tents and all. And I was so excited because I had never been to a circus before. And I was super pumped to go, and I was imagining what it would be like. And we get there, we're waiting in line, and in front of us is another dad with his little boy. We're probably the same age. And I don't know what happened, I'm not sure, but when that father got to the ticket counter and he pulled out his wallet, you could see the expression on his face. He was horrified to realize he did not have the cash he needed to buy him and his son a ticket. I don't know if he just misplaced it or what happened, but you could see it that he was sort of dumbstruck at the ticket counter. You know, what am I going to do? I don't have the money to take my little boy to the circus. And without missing a beat, my father, he pulled out his wallet and pulled out a $20 bill, tapped the man on the shoulder, and when the man turned around, my dad had the 20 in his hand and said, "Sir, I think you dropped this." And the guy looked at it and looked back at my dad and looked at it and looked back at my dad, and you could just tell they were communicating with their eyes, you know, dad to dad. Take this. This is, I'm bailing you out. This is for you and your son. And the guy looked at my dad and said, "Thank you, sir. I appreciate that." And took the $20 bill, and him and his son, they were able to go to the circus that night. And that, I mean, as a 5-year-old, right, that really stuck with me. But that was just the kind of person my dad was. And so I think there's a lot of theology we could work out of a story like that, of what it means to be generous and to be sacrificial in a moment's notice when you see that there's a great need, and to respond to that. I also think about our church, and that might seem like a cop-out for me to say, "Oh, well, Blaine," but it's very true. I think when I first arrived here as a new minister, I was just blown away by the way that this church helps the community, the funds that it sets aside, that it raises through mission, like the barbecue, for example, and that this church sets aside these funds to help the community. And whenever I'm presented with a situation, with someone who is in great need, you know, hey, I can't pay my rent, I can't pay the electric bill, we don't have groceries for our children, we've called every church, can you please help us? And I know that I can call Paul Gardner, our church administrator, and tell him about this situation, and Paul will say, we'll see what we can do. He says it every time, we'll see what we can do. And I know he means it. And it's so renewing for me, time and time again, to see the way that we can respond to those needs. And we can do so because the congregation is generous enough to give to blame. And it puts us in a position where we can help out the strangers that show up to our doorstep, which is exactly what Jesus would want us to do.
Wow, that's great. You know, those are both really amazing stories. One thing that kind of even, you know, goes with it, we had a comment, it's easy to see why you both are the wonderful people you are. Charlie is so lucky to have you as examples. And that comment really goes well with the next question, which is a good transition into, you know, actually both of your stories. And it's, how has your understanding of giving and generosity changed in light of you being parents now, having a child of your own?
I feel like I just said a whole lot, so I'll let you take the lead on that.
So when I think about that, and I think about being a mom to Charlie, it certainly doesn't. Well, sometimes at 2 a.m, but when it's not 2 a.m. and I'm tired, it doesn't feel like generosity. It doesn't feel like giving. It feels like as soon as I, you know, saw Charlie and held Charlie for the first time, it just, everything clicked. You know, I know that I've said before that I felt like in some ways I was almost like reborn too. And it's just a whole new phase, and it's just what I do now. And it's that natural and that a part of every part of who I am. Now to be the best mom that I can be in spite of COVID and being tired, or if I'm sick or feeling not great that day or in a bad mood or something. It's just, you know, you gotta shake it off, because it's not about me and it's not about Isaac anymore. It's about our little Charlie boy, as we call him. So
that's really great, and you guys know that I understand that, and I think that's a really good way to put it. It's like you're born again.
Yeah,
that's a really great way to put it.
You were renewed.
Right, I was renewed. Yes.
Yeah, and you know, Kate, she's such a wonderful mom, and she makes being a parent easy. You know, I just sort of ride her coattails because she's such a superhero, and just her love is just overflowing and abundant, and it's been really cool to watch her grow into that role and to become a mother. And of course, I always knew that she would be an amazing mom, but to see it firsthand is really special. And Charlie is a fat, happy baby, and that's because
toddler.
Yeah, he's a year old now.
Yeah.
And that's largely because Kate is with him day in and day out, and sacrifices everything for him to have the best of everything. And I think when you recognize such awesome gifts, like the gift of a child in your life, these awesome blessings that God has given you, one of the ways we honor that is by making the best of those gifts and pouring ourselves into living into those gifts, and knowing that there's potential in front of you, this life-changing potential that God is beckoning you to live into. And so I think that would be how I would start to answer that question. And you know, I like Kate, you know, I love Charlie with every fiber of my being. There's nothing I would not do for him, nothing that I would not give up for him. But for all the love that I feel for Charlie, I imagine it's a drop in the bucket compared to the ocean of love that God feels for me and feels for each of us. You know, before Charlie, you know, when I would speak of God the Father, you know, I didn't have that kind of experiential understanding of what that meant, to call God a father. But now that I am a father and have just an inkling of an idea of what it's like to love another being in such a powerful way, something that's a part of you, as we are a part of God, it's completely reframed my understanding of the depth in which God loves us. Sometimes I have to sort of take a step back and reevaluate and ask myself, all that I've done for Charlie, all that I've given Charlie on any day or any week, how does that compare to what I've given to God and what I've done for God? If I'm willing to do this for Charlie, should I also not be willing to do it for God as well? And that's a whole nother level of discipleship and faith that I'm just beginning to tap into. If I'm willing to sacrifice my life and everything I have for Charlie's sake, what would I be willing to do for God, who loves me in infinite ways? So
that's a great another great transition into, I think, the word steadfast spirit. And someone asked, what does a steadfast spirit mean to you?
Yeah, I'll take that. So steadfast is one of those old archaic words that we don't use a whole lot in our modern speech. But if you look at the Bible, it's everywhere. It's very biblical. And to me, I think one of the most important synonyms for steadfast would be resilience, to be of an unwavering spirit. And that's not something you can do by yourself. You can't have a steadfast spirit if left to your own devices, which is why I think, you and I are so relational. You talk about your friends and your family and your students and your dog. I talk about my parishioners and my neighbors and my colleagues, right? And being in relationship with people. That's what we're called to do. We're called to be in a Christ-like community. We can't develop this steadfast, unwavering, resilient spirit if we're not actively loving one another through God's grace. We're not striving to be the best community that we can be, a community that strives for justice and mission and kindness and compassion in a world that often misses the mark when it comes to those things. So for me, a steadfast spirit is key to who's in my life, who's around me, who are the people I'm surrounding myself with. Are we loving each other? Are we supporting one another? Are we actively growing and maturing in our faith? Are we giving back? Are we giving back to the church? Are we giving back to each other? Are we giving back to our community? It's this sort of this action-based faith that is responsive in nature and is key to one's sense of community. Kate, I imagine as a teacher, it requires some kind of steadfastness. I know it's not always easy. Maybe you can speak to, as a teacher, why have you never given up on a student?
Sure. I think some days every teacher can relate. It feels like it would feel good to not be so steadfast and to walk out to your car and say, I'm never coming back to this place. But the next day, you always show up anyway with the smile on your face. I think, the most important thing is the students. So the part that makes it hard to be steadfast as a teacher sometimes is the paperwork and the data collection and the third new reading curriculum that you've had to learn this year when you were just getting a hang of the first one. But the thing that never makes it hard is that relationship with the kids that you've worked so hard to build since even before day one, right? The day when you get your class list, but you don't even have your students yet. And as we've said, something that renews me is building relationships, and that to me is why I know that I'm a good teacher, because even with that student that you see the name on your class list and you think, okay, I've got him.
I was that student.
He still is sometimes. Even with that student, my game plan is always to build a relationship with that student so that I'm able to, get some buyback with, you need to stay in your seat, you need to not talk when I'm talking. We can be funny sometimes, but now's not the time.
Yeah, we do have these conversations a lot, don't we?
So yeah, building relationships, I think, is my way of staying steadfast as a teacher.
And I don't know if, just to interject my own story, I also was a teacher for a couple years, and I work with the computer now, as everyone knows. And I always tell people, I love my job now, but my computer's never hugged me. So I totally get that about being a teacher and the relationships with the kids. There's no feeling like that.
And I would add, I think Kate's so humble. She sells herself short. I think what makes you also a great teacher is Kate is really good about seeing the gifts and talents and potential in others. You have a sort of tutoring side gig business right now where she helps kids, particularly with reading. Mm-hmm. And there's been so many times where she has met with a kid and the kid says, "Oh, I don't like reading. I'm not good at reading. I don't know how to read," And Kate never buys it. She always just kind of smiles through that. And by the end of it,
that gets an okay, great.
Yeah, by the end of it, they love reading. They can't wait to show their parents what they can read. They respond to it in an entirely different way because Kate is able to see that sort of innate gift and potential in people and then draw that out. And that's something I try to do in my ministry too. I think that's also key to a steadfast spirit, is to be able to see the spiritual gifts in other people and to help plug them in such a way that they can serve God in a way that's true to them and complements their God-given gifts. I think if you want to be steadfast, you need to find your ministry, your niche, find your field and till it, so to speak. And I definitely see that as my role as a pastor is, how can I equip you? How can I work within your context? How can I help you reach your potential with the spiritual gifts that I see before me? And I think that's important.
Yep.
Don't mean to interrupt. We're almost out of time. If you can believe it, we're almost out of time. And there's one that JT asked a good question, which I think also kind of it's not necessarily let me just ask. Can you guys speak to some of the challenges that face young people or people who are at the beginning of their giving journey?
Yeah, I can totally speak to that. Kate and I were sort of in between Pastor Will and Pastor JT, sort of in that early parenthood, young adult zone where we've been married for a few years now. We have a couple of years of experience in our respective career paths, and we're sort of marching along in parenthood and coming into ourselves. I don't know if y'all realize this, but the average debt of a Methodist seminarian, so a candidate for ministry in the Methodist Church who's in seminary, the average debt they finish with is $50,000. And that was in 2014. So it's probably higher now. And the starting salary for most pastors is well below $50,000. So I think many young people are starting off in a hole of debt that's unique to their generation.
And that amount doesn't include, the student debt that I also have incurred.
Right.
To be a teacher, which is
not
the highest paying gig.
Exactly. So two young adults, two millennials now, they stand the chance of bringing two hefty bags of debt along with them into this marriage. I think about my grandfather, who was part of that greatest generation. He was born in the 1920s. He served in World War II. And by the time he was 20, he had fought in a war, he had gotten married, he had a kid, he had bought a house, and he had started working at the same place where he would retire from almost 40 years later. And he did all of this with an 8th grade education in the backwoods of South Carolina. And I think about my father, who was the generation after, another similar thing. By the time he was in his early 20s, he was married, he had a kid, he had bought a house, he was in his career, and he was able to pay for his college education by working a part-time summer job. That part-time summer job was, he paid his college tuition in the late 60s and early 1970s. So I think younger generations, they see that and they might feel frustrated that they aren't hitting those milestones at the same point in life. That they can't replicate that as easy for a variety of reasons. And I think that's hard and that's frustrating. So I think, young adults who have a significant amount of debt, I think that it's hard for them to envision themselves tithing to a church when they're already tithing to the Department of Education every month, so to speak. So I think also the world is so competitive now. It's so competitive now more than ever, especially if you're a parent. You want the best for your kid, the best school, the best test scores, the best clothes, the best electronics, right? We're all trying to keep up with the Jones, so to speak. We're all trying to keep up with each other. And the world's competitive, and it's so easy to pour all your resources into that, and to giving your kid that bigger and better life than you have for yourself. And that's, not that that's bad to strive for. I think it's a natural thing we do, but I think it's easy for that to become the focus. And it's important to remember that the church has a broader notion of family than what we might define as family. And so I think it's important for churches to reframe or to renew a young adult understanding of what it means to give to a church. Because if you give to a church and you invest in your community and your church family, then that church becomes well positioned, well poised to help subsequent younger generations. I think about all the scholarship opportunities and grant opportunities through the United Methodist Church. And if it wasn't for that, for the ministerial education funds that the Methodist Church provided me to go to seminary, I don't know if I would have been able to go to seminary, or at least the seminary I wanted to go, which was, I wanted the best biblical education I could get. So I think we need to help young people see the church as a force of good and change, an entity through God's grace and guidance that can give resources and opportunities for younger generations that are trying to live in what seems to be a world that's becoming more and more expensive and burdensome. So that would be my response. I think we're getting close to time. I know I don't know when to be quiet. So.
No, that was great, Isaac. That's so true. I think that a lot of people don't really understand how different it is for people our age, and how, like you said, how the milestones, we look to our parents and our grandparents, we see the milestones they hit, but I think you really put it in perspective. So really great job, guys. We actually went over time. A lot of great questions that I couldn't get to, so thanks for everyone who's been in the comment section. Kate, you've made a lot of friends. A lot of people say they want to be your Merle's Inlet friend. Isaac, not as many as Kate, but
I have Will and JT. We're the three best friends anyone could ever have.
So thanks so much for doing this, guys, and for everyone watching. Next week we're gonna have Jim Sellers and Lisa, and so that's gonna be really great. But that'll be on a Monday, not on a Tuesday, because everyone knows that Tuesday is gonna be a special day next week. So tune in next Monday. Follow us on social media to find out. Keep updated on that and all the other things that we're doing with the Be Renewed campaign and with Blaine. And once again, Isaac and Kate, thank you so much.
Bye, y'all.